A.Y. Young, the founder of Battery Tools.
It's incredible. Can't wait for you to see this. The United Nations is now throwing its support behind him.
Mr. Young has made a big impact in his young life, born in 1991. He's a singer-songwriter, a dancer, producer, entrepreneur, and sustainability advocate. He's staged and performed more than 800 concerts. He was named by the United Nations recently as one of 17 youth world leaders of the world, the only individual selected for that honor from the United States.
I'm here to listen. Don't ask me questions. Tell me what to do. Give me ideas.
My mission is to kind of break down these silos, these barriers, and build bridges to power collective action by bringing everyone together. My work plans in 3 different phases. I'm going to make an album power understood by renewable energy.
Right now, A.Y. Young is working on an album based on the 17 United Nations goals. Major stars like Tech-9 and Billie Eilish will collaborate.
There are 17 million people that are still living in poverty.
The whole premise of your music is about collaboration
100%.
and about getting excited. It's about going across the finish line.
I don't think anyone can disagree that everyone needs to have access to energy, water, food. My belief is that everyone in the world, we're all these outlets for change.
Change the world. How you guys doing this morning? You guys good? Okay, guys, I made like one song for each of the Sustainable Development Goals. Do you want to hear one? Maybe for Goal 17? Bring the world together? We got some resilience gurus in the room. There's Daniel Standard. Make some noise for him. Yo. Look who's made a mind up. And now I can't find the reasons not to give up. How you guys doing? You guys good? What's up? Teachers, leaders, dreamers, let's go. Oh, let's turn to a concert this morning. You can stand up, guys. 5 words. I need your help because no one knows the song, right? Sing it out. Say, we can change the world. You guys ready? Say, we can change the world. That's good, COP27. All together, building resilience. Go, we can change the world. Yeah. So we got to come together now. We got to come together now. Oh, this is good, guys. It's a concert. See, I don't like it any more than you do. But in their ignorance, that bliss is void. Good morning, how you guys doing? What's up? Hey, I think it's about time. Be humble and realize that we are one and the same, unique and one of a kind. Brighter days come ahead when we join. Hey, so put your best foot forward, go and make an effort. They call me AY. I spoke to Akon, Marvin Gaye, we in the grapevine. Let's have a great time. How you guys doing this morning? You doing good? Talking about building resilience and changing the world, saving the planet. You good? Make some noise. Good morning. Oh, they didn't think they were going to be standing. Sing out. Here we go. Go, we can change the world. Sing it out right now. If you hear me talking, we can change. Black, white, yeah. Everybody saying we can change. We got to come together now. We got to come together now. See, oh, we've got to come together now. Oh, we've got to come together now. It's good, guys. Together. See, we've got to come together through the wind and stormy weather. Hey, I think we've got to come together. Guys, I'm so happy that we have this Marrakesh partnership that builds resilience. Let's all support Sharm El Sheikh adaptation so we can take action. Peace out, guys. Thank you.
Thank you, AY, for bringing us this very energetic moment, for connecting us, especially that for your work as a young activist that's helped us be together, join common forces and purposes. So thank you for that energy you brought this morning. So it's a very good way to start. We're still waiting for our champion to arrive, but we will introduce our next speaker, which is actually before that, I'd be happy to introduce the entire session. So as you see, what we thought today is Resilience Day, but it's also Youth Day and Science Day in the COP presidency agenda. So we're bringing those three important themes together because we require the future generation and the present youth. We require the information, the understanding of the risk of impacts of science, but as well how do we inform solutions and decision making. But at the same time, the implementation and the action to resolve them through adaptation and resilience. So in this session today, we're going to be mostly understanding what is this new agenda of the Sharm el-Sheikh adaptation agenda. And we're going to be bringing as well the work, the collaboration that has been advanced through the Marrakech Partnership and the Race to Resilience Partner, and other actors that have contributed to inform a first agenda that can have a very important, significant way to bring more action and accelerate clarity where we need to be in regards of adaptation and resilience by 2030 as a first immediate target. So we will be focusing in answering those, especially three key questions. Why this agenda is important and it's a great opportunity, who is at the center of this agenda, and how we can accelerate action. We will highlight generally how transformations occur across systems. We will have a focus on the mobilization of finance and needs to accelerate those solutions. But we will also speak about the leaders, the partners, and the many different communities that are already doing those solutions. So how can we accelerate and deliver them at the scale that is needed? And now, it's my pleasure to introduce you to Dr. Catherine Hayhoe. She is climate atmospheric scientist and chief scientist of the Nature Conservancy. Catherine will give us a keynote speech on inspiration for action. Catherine.
I'm not a musician. I'm a climate scientist. And that seems very disappointing right now. But as a climate scientist, we recognize the same things that we just heard about. The risk of inaction and the urgency of action. We know that we are conducting an unprecedented experiment with the only home we have. As far back as we can go in the history of this planet, we have never seen this much carbon going into the atmosphere this quickly. We know that we have three choices. We can reduce our emissions, we can adapt and build resilience to the changes that are already here today and that are coming tomorrow, or we can suffer. And the more and the faster we reduce our emissions, the less adaptation is needed and the less suffering there will be. It isn't an either-or because the changes are already here. 30 years ago, people might say, oh, we don't need to adapt yet, we can just reduce our emissions. But that day has long passed. And we know as climate scientists that if anything, we have underestimated the impacts of a changing climate on our society. One of the biggest ways climate change is affecting us is by loading the weather dice against us. Wherever we live, We have heat waves, droughts, floods, hurricanes, typhoons, cyclones, wildfires. But as the planet warms decade by decade, the science is showing us that climate change is supersizing these events. It's making heat waves stronger and more dangerous. It's making droughts more intense, making flooding more widespread, and making our tropical storms much more intense. When we look at the handful of countries that are responsible for the bulk of our heat-trapping greenhouse gas emissions, and then we look at the countries that are most impacted by these supersized weather extremes, it's almost the exact opposite. The countries where most people are affected by climate extremes are countries like Malawi, Mozambique, Somalia, Afghanistan, Bangladesh, Pakistan. We know that climate impacts are not fair. We know that climate change has already increased the economic gap between the richest and poorest countries in the world by as much as 25% over the last 50 years. But even within high-emitting countries, there are huge disparities in how climate change affects people. Low-income neighborhoods, people who don't have homes, people who lack the resources to live in a place that is not in a flood zone or an extreme heat area. These people are also disproportionately affected by the impacts of a changing climate. And so that's why building resilience is so essential. We don't have time for single wins. At this point in time, we need solutions that give us win, 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 and wins. Like what? We need solutions that improve the quality of the air that people breathe, that reduce inequality, that address poverty, and that take up carbon too. We need solutions like protecting and restoring coastal wetlands that protect us from storm surge, restoring the mangroves along the coast that provide wood, habitat, and protection, greening urban areas so that people have protection from heat waves, trees that can absorb air pollution and take up carbon too. We need all of these solutions, and the good news is we know what a lot of these are. How to adapt, how to build resilience, how to work with people and with nature. It isn't a mystery. People are already doing it around the world. But what we need to do is we need to scale that up. We need that systems approach. We need climate resilience to not be a separate bucket. What do I mean by that? Well, imagine that you're a city, an organization, a company, a region, a state, a province, a nation, and you're making decisions. You have economic decisions, you have infrastructure decisions, you have health decisions. You have all these decisions that you're making in different buckets, and you say, and then we have climate resilience. We don't have time for that. We don't have time not to have time for climate resilience. We will not achieve the goals that we want to achieve if we leave climate change out of the picture. But what we need is to incorporate climate change into every aspect of our infrastructure decisions, our transportation decisions, our water, our food, our supply chain decisions, our health decisions. Why is that? Because our entire human society is built on an assumption that we often don't consider. The assumption that the past is a guide to the future. And so for thousands of years, it's as if we've been driving down the road looking in a rear view mirror at the past to tell us where to go. But today, because climate is changing so quickly, we are on an unprecedented curve. We must look ahead, and every aspect of our planning has to incorporate an understanding of how climate is changing and affecting every aspect of our lives. This is already happening with cities, organizations, regions around the world, but this needs to scale up, and so that is why I'm so excited about the race to resilience. Because the race to resilience is also a race to a world that is healthier, a world that is safer, a world that has more abundant water and food, a world where inequality is diminished rather than increased. A race to resilience is a race to a better future for all of us. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Catherine. And now it's my pleasure to introduce you to Dr. Mahmoud Mohideen. He is UN Climate Change High-Level Champion of COP27. Please, Dr. Mahmoud.
Thank you so much. Good morning to you all. It's great to address you today, and I was happy to listen to part of the important words by Dr. Catherine. I appreciate the science-based approach to adaptation and resilience and the leadership of the Nature Conservancy in what they have been doing, especially not just providing the science and evidence, but being great contributors to some of the major solutions, especially for small states, small islands, and we need to extend their work even further to middle-income countries when it comes to debt reduction mechanisms based on swaps from debt to investments in climate and nature. So, building on her words, I don't like to say much on the extent of the problem that we're facing, but just in summary, we are in trouble when it comes to resilience and adaptation because the world had failed in doing well in the first line of defense, which is mitigation, by dealing with the increasing emissions. And we know based on the IPCC reports that we are deviating from targets. We are not reducing emissions by 2030 by 45%. Actually, we are adding to that, and even the NDCs that have been shared as summarized by WRI in their work, they are not really getting us on target. Even as a promise, they need to be multiplied by at least by a factor of 6 in terms of ambitions. So that requires more investments and more finance and more of use of science and technology when it comes to adaptation and resilience. And I have just few practical remarks in an implementation COP on what we should really be doing together in this front. Some of you may have already seen the announcement of the Sharm el-Sheikh Adaptation Agenda, or the Sharm Adaptation Agenda. Defines the attainable outcome targets across the impact systems, identifying water and nature, human settlements, ocean and coastal areas, infrastructure, and cross-cutting enablers of planning and finance, with specific targets, specific timelines, and attached to that some adequate costing as well to identify the gaps at the country level, at regional level, and then globally. I think we should be doing a better job than the guesstimates processes that we are involved in when we are trying to identify where the gaps are to minimize confusion. I like to commend as well the work by Nick Stern and Vera Songwe when they identified the gaps globally, and the report is available on finance for climate action, with good identification of requirements from all sources, public, private, domestic, and external, to these good efforts. I think of relevance to this work is the investments in data systems. The early warning system as an initiative by the Secretary General is more than welcome, but that requires huge investments in the ecosystem in countries at national level and in local level as well. For such early warning system to be helpful, it needs to be supported by investments in the whole system of prevention and response. This will generate the early warning system rich data that could be used by scientists, by governments, and by insurance companies and the financial mitigators in order to improve their work going forward. And we need to expedite that. And I hope that some of the more vulnerable countries, as we have seen in the case of Pakistan, many countries in Africa and Latin America could be among the first utilizers of this new initiative. But this requires huge funding that should be available, and we heard the big numbers in the first phase by WMO on that. The race to resilience, which is basically the answer of the champions to support the good work coming from the state side, is gaining momentum, but still in terms of membership and in terms of commitments, we need to enhance that even further. I was told by my colleagues on the latest updates of the figures by Rama and Juani that we are around 1,700 of membership. If we compare that to the members of the Race to Zero, it's more than 11,000. Of course, it's a different approach, but that gives you something about the disadvantaged file, which is basically the adaptation file, even when it comes to membership. And of course, we know that it is disadvantaged when it comes to finance. By MDBs, the multilateral development banks, 80% of funding is going to mitigation, and 20% is going to adaptation. This needs to change by having more to mitigation, definitely in terms of absolute figures, but we need really to have a fairer share for finance for adaptation at the same time. So another practical perspective on how to get matters better, we need to strengthen this line of defense on the resilience, which is the second line of defense in cities and regions as the first responders to the climate emergency. This requires, again, science-based approach, finance, and behavioral change about the priorities when it comes to climate action in this area. Additionally, as part of the race to resilience that I just mentioned, I'm happy to see growing role of the insurance adaptation efforts, including by the Insurance Adaptation Acceleration campaign to mobilize 3,000 insurance companies equal to 50% of the market by the end of this year, when we are going to be there for COP28 hosted in Dubai. And finally, new initiatives focusing on Africa led by partners and collaborators. I'm happy to identify the following. In this very room, we have seen the launching of the African Carbon Market Initiative, ACMI. It even had an acronym now that we are encouraged to use from time to time. And we have with it an Africa Insurance Risk Facility, and we have some good work on the swaps based on the good examples by Seychelles, by Belize, and more recently by Barbados. To be frank, not just because I admire Prime Minister Maya Motley of Barbados, but because of her way with her team to accumulate knowledge based on best experience. So they built this KPI based on finance after the good work by Belize and Seychelles on project-based funding. And I think this is very much the way going forward when it comes to having finance at scale by reducing debt and investment in climate and nature. I'm encouraging countries in Africa and my region here to embrace this idea. This will not happen without the involvement of the Nature Conservancy and the good work that they have been doing as TNC to minimize the transaction cost and enhance the feasibility of funding going forward. So this is a very important engagement. For an implementation COP, we need to think about it like this. First line of defense on mitigation, we need to make a better effort in it. Now, the heavy burden is on the adaptation side because of continued failure to meet targets in mitigation, so we need to invest more. Otherwise, we'll be going to the last of last resorts, which is basically the third line of defense on loss and damage. We are observing closely what's happening in the negotiation rooms for that particular file. I hope that the scientists in the room can confirm to those who have doubts that loss and damage is very different from adaptation. It cannot be included under the same title. It needs different treatment. It needs different institution policies. It needs different financial capacities to deal with it. So we can argue forever, but science and scientists give us the kind of guidance to cut the endless arguments, because as I've been saying before, the loss and damage file, as important as it is, it was lost in endless arguments and discussions. Now it's different. It's on the agenda with high anticipation, especially from folks like our sisters and brothers in Pakistan, in developing economies, and even in advanced economies that had the lives and livelihoods compromised because of lack of attention to the climate action at large and the loss and damage file in particular. Having said that, thank you so much for your work, and we are behind you as Climate Champions team. I think my good friends here, Rama, Juani, and Maria, did I miss anything? No, I didn't? Okay, well, this is an exceptional moment then, because they always say, well, we wish that you would have said this, that, and the other, but I think this time I've been getting the nods. So I passed this test today. Thank you so much. Well done. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Mahmoud. Previous one. So before I start with the next panel, I'd like to introduce myself. My name is Marcia Toledo. I'm the Resilience Lead of the Climate Champions team. I'll be moderating these sessions. There are going to be 3 conversations coming, and we're going to have also other leads coming and supporting those conversations. We would like to encourage that you also can share your thoughts, your opinion, your ability to also complement ideas. We're not going to have question and answers, but mostly if you have a thought that you would like to share, to expand, to complement, we're going to be able as well to bring the mic to 2 to 3 interventions, just small, so that we can achieve the timeline we have. But wanted to put that ahead so you can think about as well, what would you like to share that we can help complement the discussion we're going to have. So, previous one. Before we start, I would like to invite the next panel, which is conformed by Karen Sack, Executive Director of Ocean Risk and Resilience Alliance, Sylvie Wabbs, Resilience Lead of the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations, Anna Asti, Undersecretary of Rio de Janeiro on Water, Natural Resources and Investments, Sheila Patel, Founder Director of the Society for Promotion and Area Research Centers, and Ashwin Dajal, Senior Vice President, Power and Climate, the Rockefeller Foundation. Thank you. In this panel, we will be addressing why it's important to tackle and accelerate adaptation and resilience, understanding the systems, the different systems that have high impact, and how we can do that, how we can accelerate radical collaboration for that. So all the mics should work. Can you test yours? Hello? Perfect. Thank you. So I'll start with you, Karen. You are working as a Race to Resilience partner and an alliance that brings many different actors together. You are understanding the different solutions, the challenges. Tell us why it's so critical that we address urgent action for oceans to accelerate adaptation and resilience.
Thank you so much for inviting us. It's a pleasure to be here and to be a partner with Race to Resilience. So we have the air conditioning on today, but 50 degrees Celsius is the temperature at which human cells start to degrade. if it weren't for the ocean and the amount of heat from our emissions that the ocean has absorbed, our average mean temperature globally would be 50 degrees Celsius. And this air conditioning noise would not even be helpful to us. Because of the ocean, the average mean temperature globally at the moment is 13 degrees Celsius. So the ocean is not a nice to have. It's an essential planetary asset. And we haven't really focused on why we need to protect it in the past. So the question for us really now is how we nurture that asset, how we can drive investment into it. And to do that, really the answer is both nature and nurture. And I think we all know from some of the comments that Catherine made earlier that nature can deliver up to 30% of climate solutions. And the incredible thing about nature is that it's been adapting to change and building resilience for millennia. So let's learn from it, let's work with nature and nurture those solutions by driving investment into it, working with communities to do so as well. And that's where Aura comes in, through this collaboration, really working at the intersect of finance, climate and ocean policy with partners from the private sector, the public sector, civil society and multilateral organizations to drive significant investment into the space at scale.
Thank you, Karen. Important is that different sectoral approach and the urgency, as you said. If we do not take action now, it's going to be too late. We're going to see the impacts of a warming ocean.
Absolutely.
Sylvie, you're working for many years advancing opportunities for increasing resilience in agriculture and food systems. Why is urgent that we take that multi-sectoral view, that we take a system view, and how we can accelerate this?
Thank you, Marcia. Yes, we need to take joined-up action not only for agri-food system, but across systems. And the way Karen spoke about ocean is key, and share that language. But let me just speak about the agri-food system, which is really need to transform to become one of the main solutions to the climate crisis. We not only need to do that for tackling the climate crisis, but also for the food crisis. Today, we have more than 200 million people suffering from acute food insecurity. That's not acceptable. And tackling some of the food crisis issues is very important, and tackling climate change goes together with that. So that's one of the very strong justification for urgent action. So both climate is one of the drivers of hunger. Together with conflict and with other crises and disasters, climate change does not act alone. It's a driver of major risks, extreme events, but also agriculture, food production, which is a climate-sensitive activity, is very exposed to multiple shocks and stresses. You have the whole list of shock and stresses from climate change. In addition to the number of people who have agriculture and food type of livelihood, we count about 2.5 billion people with agricultural livelihoods. That's including fishers and fish farmers, by the way. But there's probably more than 4 billion people with food-related activities, of food actors. And they're extremely vulnerable and affected and threatened by climate change. So that's another element for the urgency to act. We have the UN Food System Summit in 2021 that has been putting and advocating for transforming our food system in a more inclusive, resilient, sustainable way, because today it's failing to deliver on these three dimensions. So we have a system approach that's on the agenda, which is still need to act together urgently. We also know that agriculture sectors absorb more than 26% of the total economic losses are from climate-related disasters. And listen to this, when it comes to drought, it's 80%. It's huge. We've seen what's going on in the 5th consecutive drought in the Horn of Africa today. Another argument for urgent action. In addition, the smallholders, small farmers, fishers, tree dwellers, livestock owners, they produce more than 80% of the food supply in developing countries. 80%. And they are on the front line of climate change. Isn't that not another argument for acting quickly, fast, now? So I think this is all the rationale for really putting the transformation of a system, which means from production to consumption, including processing, distribution, refrigeration, and up to the table, a system approach for addressing multiple climate risk and impacts across all these different value chains, putting emphasis on the people and the local action. I think I stop
Perfect.
here on the solution. Thank you.
Fantastic. Sylvie, excellent. You very well summarized that opportunity across the entire system, but as well as you said, with a people focus, the people at the front line suffering from not access to food or not ability to produce because of droughts and other challenges, so other climate impacts. Anna, you're working in a highly populated state, and you struggle with challenges with all the cycle of water, access, provision, and sanitation. As an Undersecretary for Rio de Janeiro, what is the urgency that you have? And how are you addressing both engaging on planning and finance for resilient approaches, for resilient decisions that include lowering mitigation, but at the same time enhances water security, restore the nature? What is the urgency, and how are you delivering that? How are you responding to that?
Thanks. Hello, everyone. 100 years ago, we were only 500,000 people in the metropolitan area of Rio. There was no metropolitan area in Rio de Janeiro. We are now 13 million people. So in 100 years, the population just jumped. And how were we prepared for this amazing process? It was amazing. And what happens now is that we have our sanitation reached more or less 50% of 13 million people. So we lack sanitation, we lack lots of important public service. Last year, we just succeeded to make, after 30 years late in the process, our sanitation process, and we will be in the next 10 years 90% sanitized. Why is this important? Because this will be our way to get to be a blue metropolis. That's our plan now. We have just started a state program for water security, and it's aim for 20 years. And it's very important because water security is now a plane. Water security for us, it's our way through to go into adaptation. We just, this year, we lost more than 300 people in one night, in one rain, silting area. Last year, more or less the same thing, every year, and it's getting closer and closer. The time that we have the dry weather and the water, it's really closer now. So we have to adapt, and we have to invest in water security. This year, we will be invested $1.2 billion in water security in the next 5 years, more or less. So this is something that is really urgent in our area. It's not for the next 10 years. We have to do it now. And it's really a crisis that we are living there, especially now when summer is starting. Yeah. So we have started the Blue Economy Project. We have more or less in our coast 10 million people living in the coast of Rio de Janeiro. 44% our GDP comes from the ocean economy. So it's really an important matter for us. And what we have now is that nature-based nature solutions, it's really very important to get our fresh water possible for us to drink. Because even if we invest in depolluting and sanitation and everything, we need to preserve fresh water. And to preserve fresh water, we have technology already, and it's forest. So we need to preserve our forests. And what we have, in the last 10 years, we didn't deforestate in Rio, but in the last century, we deforestate a lot. And our aim for 2050 is to achieve 10% plus in our Mata Atlântica forest, our rainforest. This means 441,000 hectares of forest. We have in our Mata Atlântica fund, which is a blended finance fund, we have now 120 million, but we would need $5 billion to reforestate 10% of Mata Atlântica forest. So it's something huge. We need really to invest in new platforms to access finance. So we are now, we have an MOU with NASDAQ Technology through JAP, and we will start a platform, environmental asset platform in Rio de Janeiro. By the end of the year, we started the first operations for carbon credit. It's a private platform, it's not a public platform. We will be entering the platform with our public assets, our forests. We have more or less 1.4 million of hectares in forest now. We want to achieve 1.7, but we have 1.4 now. And, but what intrigues me and what I want to learn, and I think that to be in COP it will be really important, is that how we see the financing structure for a territory, for a region. So what I'm saying, I have different kinds of environmental assets. Water can be an asset. Credit water. How do I plan credit water in an environmental asset platform? So all of this we are thinking inside our blue economy plan for the next 20 years in Rio. Sorry.
Fantastic.
Lots of information, 5 minutes.
Thank you, Anna. Actually, you help us expand the thinking we're having, collaboration, partnerships, many solutions towards one common goal, systemic, across sectors, across the value chain, focusing on people, like what Sylvie said. And you are bringing the perspective of improved planning, innovative finance mechanisms and approaches, and also consider strongly nature-based solutions at the core. No? So thank you for sharing your experience. And Sheila, you're working very hard to address the challenges on human settlements, on informal settlements. And you have also a vision and a campaign coming up in the next days. Tell us the urgency and how you think this can be addressed.
So thank you very much for inviting me in this August speakers lineup. Today, Catherine, thank you very much for giving me the segue for why I'm doing what I'm doing. I'm part of an amazing global network of slum dwellers in 33 countries where women's collectives are at the heart of this process. They are the ones who design, construct, finance their own homes, despite what governments try to do. And they are at a loss today on how to protect themselves in these new extreme climate conditions, which they don't understand when, which one will hit them where. Their building techniques, their systems of their survival, food, transport, health, everything is completely dysfunctional because what they did in the past is no longer functional anymore. And it's amazing that women themselves put a list of things. These are 50 women from these 33 countries who we call our global leaders, who put together this list of 5 things of what we want to understand so we can make change happen. And Roof Over Our Heads is the first campaign. It's interesting that we are in the MENA region, where in Arabic, Ruh means soul. And they say that our home is our protection and it is the soul of our understanding of who we are and where we live. So our campaign seeks to create a women-centered process in which the new science of climate, of technologies, of construction, of measurements, of how change has to be monitored, of new techniques of design for passive and active heating are understood by women on the ground, who are also the litmus test of all these magical things that we talk about, which fly over their heads. They don't understand what you mean when you say these things. So how in the lives of these 2 billion of people, whose people they represent, there are 2 billion people who today live in these conditions, and in the next 10 years, it is anticipated that there will be another 1.5 billion climate refugees coming into the cities, and you know that they are going to be in these informal settlements. So they see themselves as torchbearers of integrating this new knowledge, of testing the solutions that all of us are throwing at them, so that they become the petri dish in which this transformation happens. So we are anticipating that there will be 100 such groups in 30 to 40 countries. We have invited, you have been very kind to help us with our roundtables, bringing everybody together. But we are hoping in the next 2 years, we will develop climate linked. You know, we are informed by science that there are 5 major climatic zones for cities. We're going to test what solutions that are affordable to poor people that they can do themselves, so that they don't just become beneficiaries and victims of this process of, and all of us in the adaptation space telling them, you poor thing, we tell you what to do. They want to be active participants. They want the right to access the kind of research that Catherine is talking about, and which all of you are discussing with food and water and everything, so that they make informed choices themselves. They demonstrate what others can do, and they can make new demands on their cities, their countries, and all of us globally. So wish us luck.
Thank you, Sheila. Very powerful and very important for us as well in our story we're building. You bring the dimension, perhaps the most clear, connected to the vulnerability of the human being. Without a home that protects your soul, without security, it's impossible to also fight and be adapted to the climate change. So thank you for bringing all the efforts rooted in women, rooted in communities that are identifying opportunities to take the slum out of the people. Ashwin, you work as well very strong on identifying opportunities for accessing and provision of resilient energy programs. Why this is urgent and how we can accelerate action to that?
Thank you. So it's a pleasure to be here. I read the 30-point agenda, and I just can't say how important that agenda is, and I'm so pleased to be part of an effort to support that. So firstly, just congratulations. Secondly, I have to say I have slightly, it's so exciting to be on a stage with Sheila, who's been a friend and an inspiration for such a long time. So listening to you again is just so great. So look, when we talk about energy systems and we talk about infrastructure, we tend to think about it as, how do we make infrastructure resilient? And I think that's a really important part of this question. But we also have to talk about how does infrastructure build resilience of households, of communities, of societies. And that's what I just want to say a couple of words about, because in many cases, in order to make infrastructure resilient, you have to first have infrastructure. And when we talk about energy, we're still talking about a very divided world. So energy as an enabler, or energy access and energy consumption as an enabler of resilience, while at the same time recognizing the perverse reality that the more energy we consume, the more we're contributing to the climate crisis. And we have to figure out a sort of synergy in that mitigation, resilience, adaptation cycle when it comes to the energy system. I've spent my life working on poverty and economic development programs. And when we look at the sort of Venn diagram now of extreme poverty and energy poverty, it's essentially exactly the same. It's the same people in the same households, in the same districts, in the same regions, all over the world. There's 700-800 million people who are unelectrified. There's no rich country that is energy poor. There is no rich household that is energy poor. And so we really have to figure out this. The question of resilient energy systems cuts deep at multiple levels. So about half the world is energy poor in the sense that they don't have either any reliable access to a grid or it's highly unreliable or very unaffordable. And you think about what does that do when we talk about resilience of societies, of individuals, of households? It limits opportunity. And the first asset you need to build around resilience is the creation of opportunity. It limits, we talk about food, we talk about health, we talk about housing, all of these interconnected systems where energy has to sort of run through those in a way that enables the solutions that need to take place for cooling or for inclusive housing or for effective irrigation systems and all of those things. So one of the things that we have been really focusing on in partnership with many others is really trying to unleash the full potential of distributed renewable energy systems. Why distributed? First, in your sort of classic training about resilience, the whole question about system failure, and you have decoupled energy systems, it actually builds more resilience. Some of the mini-grids that we've been supporting in India, when we had floods 3 or 4 years ago, were the only energy systems still functioning. Even in the US, in California, with the wildfires, they're talking about decoupling and breaking down the systems into smaller grids. Secondly, they are actually quicker to deploy. So we need to change the mindset around how infrastructure is built out from the inside out to change that to being from the outside in. How do we get local distributed renewable energy into communities to not just power lives, but also livelihoods? And frankly, at the moment, there's a lot of capital waiting on the sidelines to help do that. And what we're focused on is trying to draw it in by using philanthropy in the best way possible, which is take the maximum risk.
Thank you, Ashwin. And you help us complete with a very important also angle that is cross-cutting, planning and finance. How do we make risk visible that improves decision-making? How do we enable intersectionally and address this issue in a holistic way? Adaptation and resilience is not only siloed or only for one sector or for one type of stakeholder. It's integral and holistic. Thank you for bringing those elements as well and the efforts that you're working on energy, so perfect. So this is actually the Sharm el-Sheikh adaptation agenda. It's not an agenda that starts from zero. It starts from already many different solutions that have been accumulated over the past decades. Very much bottom-up, community, leadership, responding to those threats and impacts that they are everyday experiences. But what the Sharm el-Sheikh adaptation agenda is bringing is an opportunity to articulate it, to have a system view, to bring the many multiple actors that actually play a role and can play even more role into a synergy, into synchronicity. And for that reason, the different already identified opportunities where the planet can be by 2030, how we make it tangible, how we can avoid that narrative of adaptation is important, it's everywhere but nowhere. How can we change that by saying, actually, there is an opportunity, we have the science, we can already understand what are the certain investments in ecosystems, for example, restoring mangroves, or certain changes that we need in water security requiring interventions with nature-based solutions, or in food and agriculture, climate resilient systems. All of those solutions, what is the opportunity by 2030? Those adaptation outcomes are actually based on that experience of implementation that are existing and allowing us to have a much more manageable agenda to gear action towards, to facilitate planning, but as well the mobilization of the finance that we need. So I want to thank the panel. This has been a very enriching discussion, so thank you very much. We're going to go straight to our next person invited, and afterward we're going to have two panels where we can open more space for for reflections. I'm a little bit afraid we're running out of time, so it's okay in that sense. So thank you, Karen, Sylvie, Anna, Sheila, and Ashwin. Thank you. So it's my pleasure now, as we heard this discussion, as well, the perspective of the people, the ones that are experiencing those challenges. And we've invited Emithal Mahmoud, who is a poet, UN Refugee Agency Goodwill Ambassador, and an activist, to share with us her interpretation of the urgency. Emmy, please.
If you are reading this, I forgive you. You have grown far from the heart of me, my child, have lost the familiar love we held for one another in your first years of life. When you were young, you used to marvel at the plants and critters that ran across my bosom. You worshipped the water, swam up and down my rivers, you drank from my rain, laughed at each first snow, begged for sun on the cloudy days. You didn't hesitate to sink your fingers into the mud of me and tickle loose little seedlings, droplets, pebbles, and worms. How you built a refuge for every wayward wanderer, lining the kitchen shelves and jars of lightning bugs and fireflies. How you came to me, resting your head at my tender hearth, your weary body in my pockets. You loved me. You drank the sap, gum, honey from my trees, drank the breeze. You nurtured me before you knew what it was to nurture, tended me before you knew what it was to tend. Tiller, sower, farmer, green-thumbed little one, you knew me. Lately, you hurt me. You break and cut and tear into me, and I forgive you. For I am a part of you, like your brothers and sisters before you, so I forgive you. I forgive you again for the reaping you do with no intention to sow, again for the waste and greed and gluttony when you were young. You used to ask me why they do this. Once brothers and sisters, now spilling the blood of your people into the earth, shaking apart the branches of your family tree. You losing ground and hope all in one fell swoop. You came to me, begged me to make sense of it all. You rested your head under the shade of date palms and magnolias. All I could offer you then was a promise that wherever you would go, you would find me. But lately, there isn't much left for me to promise. They've dug pits into my sides, have stolen the rubies, gold, and diamonds Maya placed in my thighs. I do all I can to heal. My weary body won't clear away the hurt so easily. My waters rush, but do not soothe. The air in my lungs suffocates the little ones. I cough and spew and gush and bruise, and it will not heal when a child of mine dies by my hand. Here, in the long forgotten valley of your youth, visitors come not of their own accord, but by necessity. Abdul Ghani and Izdihara sink their fingers into the mud of me. Saplings cling, and I am made whole again. Hatim builds monuments to my skies, captures the sun, channels the lightning, and I am whole again. Luca and Layatu surround their homes in fruit born of me. The children eat and grow and are healthy, and I am whole. Isman protests, "It isn't mine alone to mend," he says. I need you to build and build again, to make new, to bring forth life from relentless earth, making an oasis of charred terrain, building a refuge from only scar tissue and lightning strikes. Let me be more to you than just a final resting place. Let me do more for you than call you home. Child of mine, if you are reading this, I need you, your mother. If this land could speak, would she thank us, praise us, ridicule us, or beg us? Would her voice be wary, gentle, disdainful? Would it shake with sorrow, with rage? I used to wonder about these things all of the time. At 11 years old, I watched my neighbor's house crumble before my eyes. The floodwaters came and washed away the earth and clay most people used to build their homes. To see her wade through her house like that, to watch her try and salvage what little she had left. Our country was already locked in turmoil, and now the earth began to purge us too. If you could stop the next tornado from leveling your home, the next hurricane from wiping out your city, the next drought from starving your people, or the next lightning strike from ending your life, wouldn't you? The locusts in the Horn of Africa, the floods in South Sudan, the ice in Chicago, the fires in California, Australia. We are at the precipice of possible change, a turning point that can and will define us. Fire or ice, how will the world end? I don't know, and I don't want to find out. Not in this generation, and not in the next. Thank you.
Thank you, Amy. You made us connect with the humans we are. You help us put the face on adaptation and resilience. Your work as a UN Refugee Agency Goodwill Ambassador, you have seen many different challenges and difficulties. Please tell us why we need to not forget to put people at the center of adaptation and resilience.
Thank you so much, everyone. I'm very humbled to be here. Thank you for having me. And thank you for the beautiful question. I really do think that, a lot of times when we start to advocate for the changes that we want to see in the world, ironically, we tend to forget the human aspect. Because there is a very serious and intense human toll. And as you heard in my poem, there were a lot of people that I mentioned: Abdul Ghani, Istihara, Hatim, Asman, Luca, and Layatu. I had the pleasure of being able to talk to them before I created this poetry. For me, what I think is really important to understand is that when you talk about representation and inclusion, it doesn't begin at the outcome of a solution. It begins at the outset of planning. And I think that when you look around at your table and you're starting to plan something that will affect people, if the people who are going to be most affected by this are not there at the table, then you've already started off with the wrong foot. I think a lot of times when we don't have representation, we end up with solutions that are not fit for purpose nor representative of the communities that they serve. And that's why I want to leave you with a really important reminder with this next poem, People Like Us, which actually really, really intensely talks about the human toll and the human effect, and I think that's one of the most important things to remember. Right now, more than 70% of refugees are from countries that are climate vulnerable, and more than 60% of people who were forcibly displaced by disaster in 2021 were also from climate vulnerable countries. And I guess if I were to leave you with one thing to remember as you move forward these next couple of days before I read this, is that when you're going into these spaces, be the advocate for people who cannot be in that room. There are rooms that I can't enter that you can, and there are rooms that you can't enter that I can. In those moments, let's remember one another, and let's remember the people that are most affected by this to create the change that we want to see in the world. All right, so this poem is called People Like Us. Oh, sorry. This poem is called People Like Us. I'm super nervous if you can't tell. This poem is called People Like Us. Thank you. It's very personal for me because the village that my dad was born in doesn't exist anymore. And as a lot of you probably know, desertification, which was another word for climate change way back when, was one of the exacerbating factors of the genocide in Darfur. People are at the receiving end and people are at the affecting end. If we can connect those people, we can bridge that gap. Please remember that. Okay.
Thank you.
Okay. Memories of my childhood live between the rings of sand around my ankles and the desert heat in my lungs. I still believe that nothing washes worry from tired skin better than the Nile and my grandma's hands. Every day, I go to school with the weight of dead neighbors on my shoulders. The first time I saw bomb smoke, it didn't wind and billow like the heat from the kitchen hearth, but it forced itself on the Darfur sky, smothering the sun with tears that it stole from our bodies. The worst thing about genocide isn't the hunger, the murder, the politics, the government-paid soldiers that chase you across borders and into camps. It's the silence. For 3 months, they closed the schools down because people like us are an eyesore. So the first month, we took it. The second month, we waited. The third month, we met underneath the date palm trees, drinking up every second our teachers gave us, turning fruit pits into fractions. On the last day, they came with a message, put them in their place. We didn't stand a chance. Flesh was never meant to dance with silver bullets, so we prayed for the sun to come and melt daggers from our backs, lifted our voices up to God till the clouds were spent for weeping, in the sand beneath our toes echoed with the song of every soul that ever walked before us. I hid underneath the bed that day with 4 other people. 12 years later, and I can't help but wonder where my cousins hid when the soldiers torched the houses, threw the bodies in the wells. So if the weapons didn't get you, the poison would, and sometimes they didn't want to use bullets because it would cost them more than we did. What does it matter? I've seen 16 ways to break a heart. When you build nations on someone's bones, what sense does it make to break them? In one day, when I choked on rifle smoke, my father washed the blood from his face. My uncles carried half the bodies to the hospital and the rest to the grave, and we watched. For every funeral we planned, there were 60 we couldn't have. The sand in the Sahara tastes a lot like powdered bone, and when the soldiers came, our blood on their ankles, I remember their laces. Scarlet footprints on the floor. I remember waking to the sound of hushed voices in the night, etched with the kind of sorrow that turns even the loudest dreams to ash. Our parents came home with broken collarbones and a taste of fear carved into their skin, and it was impossible to believe in anything. Fear is the coldest thing in the desert, and it burns you, bows you down to half your height, and owns you. And no one hears you, because what could grow in the desert anyway? Thank you, everyone. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you, Amy. It's a wonderful, wonderful gift. Thank you. So after recognizing and reconnecting with our human side, and not forgetting that all what we are doing is at the center is people, we have the next session very much bringing those transformational solutions to be accelerated and implemented. I'm happy to invite Boholo Kenevendo, UN Climate Change High-Level Champions Special Advisor and Africa Director, for the next session. Boholo.
Right. Thank you, Marcia. Thanks, Sammy. In the spirit of putting a human face to adaptation and resilience, we must indeed make sure that we are regionalizing our work and localizing our work. And so in accelerating adaptation action and building a resilient world at pace and scale, we recognize that we need alignment, collaboration, and a common vision. And in the spirit of radical collaboration, I have the pleasure of welcoming to the stage Mr. Joseph Ngaga, who is currently the Vice President of the Global Energy Alliance for People and Planet. Welcome, Joseph. And as he takes his seat, I also would like to introduce Ms. Dorothy Maseke, the Group Head of Risk and Compliance at ICEA Lion Group. Just to note, the ICEA Lion Group is also a member of GFANS, and they are part of the task force with UNEP-FI. Thank you for joining us both. Do you have a mic, Joseph? Okay, great. So we've heard quite continuously about the Sharm el-Sheikh adaptation agenda. Yesterday, Dr. Muhyiddin mentioned that insurance in itself is the first line of defense when it comes to building resilience and adaptation. So I'm going to start with you, Dorothy. What is it, coming from the insurance industry, that you think insurance industry can do in order to drive this first line of defense and make sure that it is strengthened?
Yes, so I'll go through the first aspect of understanding what insurers do. So insurers have 3 roles. We are risk managers, so we actually, manage risk. So we go to our clients, we go to countries, and we tell them what to do to manage risk. We're also risk carriers, meaning we actually take on the risks and we pay the claims when they fall due. And we're also investors, so we invest the premiums. So insurance has a critical role in ensuring that economies are resilient when it comes to loss and damage. And just yesterday, what we did as a group of 85 signatories of the Nairobi Declaration on Sustainable Insurance, we launched the Africa Climate Risk Facility. Now, this facility will ensure or enable private sector participants to actually introduce products and solutions for that first line of defense on loss and damage. In this facility, we made some pledges and some commitments. We pledged to underwrite 14 billion USD in terms of premiums up to 2030. That's a cumulative figure. We also pledged to insure 1.4 billion Africans, again cumulatively, between 2023 to 2030. And we will be insuring them against floods, against cyclones, and against drought. So that really is what we did yesterday.
Fantastic, Dorothy. One could ask, what makes this initiative and this facility different from many others that we know have been announced either this week or before COP, but all in the lead up to COP?
Yes, so this is different because one, it is market driven. It is private sector led. It is the insurers coming together and saying that we have a critical role to play. And these are insurers across Africa. So the fact that it is market-driven, it means that, the insurers are coming together to actually play a role in creating appropriate solutions. Again, it's Africa initiated. And just goes back to saying that we need to actually develop solutions, African solutions, for Africa's problems.
Fantastic. Thanks, Dorothy. Joseph, co-conspirator. It's been great. We launched the African Carbon Market Initiative on the 8th. Many have been talking about this, and we want to know, why was it important that we make sure that ACME gets off the ground?
Thanks, Bokolo. Hello, everybody. I think, following on to what my colleague just said, we need Africa solutions for Africa challenges. The Africa Carbon Market Initiative was launched 2 days ago, or yesterday. It feels like a long time ago, with a really strong support from African governments, African private sector, African development organizations, and Africa communities to drive a number of outcomes. The reason we needed to put together an initiative of this kind is that it is very clear that climate finance needs to flow towards developing or emerging economies to address climate challenges. Climate finance has several streams. Insurance is part of it. Carbon credits could be part of it. And we know that with net zero, private companies globally will need to think about how they offset some of their emissions. And so from that perspective, the goal was to make sure that as this market develops, it is designed and implemented with and for African challenges and to provide African solutions. It is intended to achieve several outcomes. We strongly believe that we can grow that market 19-fold to up to 300 megatons by 2030 and up to 2.5 gigatons by 2050. It's very important that we make sure that there's a right price for African carbon market credits. And so we intend to have a carbon price floor that supports African-generated carbon credits. We need a transparent and equitable distribution of those revenues. We must have transparency so the money is flowing all the way to the smallholder farmers and those who really will be impacted by climate and therefore deserve a level of support financially. This initiative and the African carbon market generally could generate up to 30 million jobs by 2030 and up to 100 million by 2050. These are new jobs as well as improving incomes for smallholder farmers and so on. It is very ambitious, and so we had also to think about how do you take that ambition and turn it into reality. The initiative will have 13 action programs that will include working with governments to help them develop their own programs, working with Africa-specific projects such as diesel generators in Nigeria. How do you provide carbon credits for changing from diesel generators to solar home systems? How do you get revenues for the smallholder farmer in Ethiopia who's sequestering carbon through agriculture? We must develop methodologies that currently may not exist or are not suited for the needs of the continent. We also need to build local capacity. There's a lot of work that has been done supporting governments, thinking about capacity for negotiation on the climate topic. We need to go one level lower and talk about how we help build local capacity for verification, for project development, for certification, so that we ensure that this opportunity on the continent is affordable, is suited for smaller sized projects, which is what we will see coming from the continent. There will be other objectives, but those are some of the ones we will target. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Joseph. It is very clear that a common thread during COP27, the days that have passed, is about financing for development. You know, and when we speak about carbon markets, the question has been, why are we putting carbon markets up front when there are issues of greenwashing and so forth? But we are focusing on financing adaptation and resilience for the communities. Can you unpack that statement a little bit more?
That's a very good statement. Let's see. So I think from the Africa Carbon Market Initiative's perspective, in order to ensure that there is adequate finance flows into the continent, and in order to ensure that that flow is to adaptation and resilience, besides identifying the right projects, besides developing the right methodologies, it's also very important to ensure that there's integrity. Integrity on the side of the projects. So are they designed well? Do they benefit those who deserve that benefit, the smallholder farmers, the local communities involved in conservation, and so on? And on the other side of that, the greenwashing question. So the initiative will work with companies that have signed up to very specific principles that mitigate against the issue of greenwashing. This cannot be an area where there's no confidence. If we're going to achieve that ambition, the transparency, the credibility is imperative. And so it's extremely important that we ensure that whoever signs up to this initiative, particularly the private companies, have made commitments and are working towards the principles we have indicated. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So we can all agree that the individual efforts of regions, cities, businesses, and investors can really just take climate action so far. And we need to make sure that as we are racing towards in this decade of action, we need more consolidated efforts and ensure that we are working towards the same goal and we are co-conspirators. And I just want to take a moment and open up for the floor before I close. And I recognize a few faces, so please, if I call you out, bask in the spotlight I give to you. So I'd like to call out Olajobi. Olajobi Makira, yes, of the lead of the Africa Business Leaders Coalition at UN Global Compact. From your perspective, we met last night. We saw a big statement by the private sector. Can you tell us why it's important that we have a coalition of African businesses making commitments towards a greener future?
Yeah, thank you very much indeed, Boholo, and thank you everyone. Let me actually read from the statement that was released yesterday by the private sector. Let me read it so that you can hear the voice or voices of these 56 CEOs from Pan-African CEOs. Let me read. I have, the 56 CEOs, 56 chief executive officers and chairpersons from a diverse range of sectors representing more than $150 billion in revenue and over 1,000 employees across 50 African countries said that they believe that the African private sector is uniquely positioned to positively shape the future of our continent and improve the welfare of our communities. So they believe in that. They also said that they commit. So the statement is not only issuing statement, they were making bold commitment. This is historic and unique. They said they commit to participate in the UN Global Compact and to uphold its 10 principles in its business practices and with its suppliers and customers. So not only taking action within their own companies, but within their supply chain. They said they commit to robust company resilience plans to improve its adaptive capacity and build systemic resilience by explicitly accounting for climate risks in its business and investment and enabling its suppliers to do the same. They commit to uphold the guiding principles of a just transition as central to all our climate actions and advocacy. They commit to set company targets to drastically increase the share of renewables in our energy use. They also commit to elevate the voice of the African private sector and bring the African perspective to global stages, such as COP27. And they said Africa cannot do this alone.
Right.
And they called on the international community to join us in addressing these issues. So indeed, the African private sector, through the UN Global Compact, the Africa Business Leaders Coalition, we are ready to move. We are ready to work to support. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you very much, Olajobi. Indeed, in relation to the implementation of the Sharm el-Sheikh adaptation agenda, it is very pleasing to have such landmark commitments from the African non-state actors, and in particular, the private sector. With that, ladies and gentlemen, I wish to thank you for listening and for being part of this discussion. But I want to leave you with very key thoughts out of the adaptation agenda. And those are, in order for us to deliver climate action, whole-scale transformations are needed on two fronts. So we ask you to be part of these two fronts. One, to get to net zero emissions as soon as possible to prevent incremental damage. And two, to significantly increase actions and investments to adapt now to the current and unavoidable impacts of climate change, putting people and nature first in pursuit of a resilient world where we don't just survive climate shocks and stresses, but we do thrive in spite of these shocks. Thank you very much and good morning.